Thank you, Mr. Stuart Agnew, for attending this interview. I would like to pick your brain on everything Brexit.
Yes, I'm
Um,
ready.
Good. Would you like to tell us your relation to the Brexit movement?
Uh, I'm one of these people who crossed the fence, so to speak. Um, I was living abroad in 1975 when we had a referendum in this country on remaining in the European Union. But if I had been here, I would have voted to remain in it in 1975. But I then returned to this country and we voted pretty convincingly 2-1 to remain in it in 1975. And most people thought, oh, that was the end of the matter. But there was a journalist called Christopher Booker who used to write a regular piece in the Sunday Telegraph, which is a right leaning newspaper in the United Kingdom. And he had a small section of this every week called This Europe, just a small box. And every time he would select a firm, a small company, a small business in this country that was being very badly affected by European regulations and legislation. And this had a drip, drip effect on me all through the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And I started to get frustrated that our politicians were not able to make all the laws that ran our country. It was a frustration. Uh, he then said in one of his articles that this small party called UKIP had been born. And after 2 or 3 years, I joined it. A few years, I joined it. Not really expecting to do anything very much. But I didn't realize I joined something that was very small and was about to grow very rapidly, which put me on a path that I'd never expected to be on. One of the reasons that UKIP suddenly appeared on the map was because of a change in the voting system for the European Parliament elections. Hitherto, we had the first past the post system in large county constituencies. So my county of Norfolk was a single constituency for the European Parliament. And because it's mainly a Conservative voting county, the Conservative person got in. However, in 1999, the European Parliament insisted that all elections to the European Parliament had to be on a closed regional list system. And they chose the regions, the geographical boundaries of the regions, and they said how many candidate MPs would be elected from each region. And that really was the starting point for UKIP. Once they changed that electoral system, there was no such thing as the wasted vote. Every vote counted. And UKIP stood candidates in my region in 1999, and we got one of the 8 seats. And that happened in 2 other regions. Nigel Farage got in the southeast, and somebody got in the southwest. And that was a huge step forward. Suddenly, the party, which had been in existence for about 6 years, it suddenly had electoral representation in the European Parliament. It made a huge difference. And it was only because, I mean, the EU made a rod for its own back by changing that system, but they insisted this is how elections to the European Parliament must be held. And they made all the rules. They said, this is where that region's boundary will be, and this is where that region's boundary will be. And these were all new divisions for us in this country. We were divided into counties or countries, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England, and then they were divided into counties. We didn't have regions on a formal basis, and they were invented for us by the European Union. And they very craftily had a tiny little region up in the northeast of England. And the idea of that was to try and get a regional government there and a regional assembly. And they put an enormous effort into doing that. And that would then be the pretext, or the, what's the word I'm looking for, the example for others. That never happened. There was a referendum up there, and they threw it out. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. So we got 3 seats in the European Parliament, and another 5 years went by. During that time, Nigel Farage started to get a bit of a reputation for himself as a very good speaker, an orator. And because we had a little bit of some electoral representation, by law, we had to, every now and again, be represented on political programs where they asked representatives from different parties, so question time or any questions, that sort of thing. And he performed very well on those. And he started to become a character and a well-known figure in his own right. That makes a huge difference. He was so good at speaking. Well, then we had in 2004 another election, the European Parliament election. And we went from 3 seats to 12 seats. I mean, it was astonishing. And one of the reasons for that was that a famous television presenter called Robert Kilroy Silk, and he had an audience of 5 million on his television program. He decided to join UKIP, and he wanted to be an MEP. He was given a region to stand in, and his name was really, really big, and that made a big difference. We got 12 MEPs in. I mean, it set the political world alight in this country. That had not been expected. But unfortunately, we went into trouble very, very quickly after that. One of those elected was wanted by the authorities for some sort of fraud, and tax fraud, I think. And the press found out about that within 48 hours. And so he was thrown out of UKIP, having just won a seat in our name, but we couldn't have somebody like that in. And then not long afterwards, another man called Tom Wise in my own region, he'd had been made redundant many times in his career, and I think the size of the salary that he was getting rather turned his head. Anyway, he ended up going to prison, I have to say, for not doing his expenses properly. And it was all that was very bad news for us. And everyone was saying that in the next election in 2009, that we would be a busted flush, that it would all be over for UKIP, and we'd just go back perhaps to having 3 MEPs, and that would be that. And we were going nowhere in the polls. Meantime, I had been elected number 2 in the Eastern region, because I'd been worked quite hard for the party one way and another. And then UKIP had another bit of luck. So the first bit of luck UKIP had was the change in the electoral procedure, putting us onto a regional list system, proportional representation. The second bit of luck was the expenses scandal in the UK Parliament, where both Labour and the Conservatives individuals were found guilty of misappropriating public money. And there was outrage and disgust at it all, but it was all in the British Parliament. And so out of disgust, a lot of people didn't vote for their normal parties. They either didn't vote at all or they voted for UKIP. And so instead of failing, we went from 12 seats to 13 seats, but it was actually a bit better than that, because the European Union had grown so much in those few years with the Eastern states coming in. They had to shrink the number of seats from each country so that there was enough room in the parliament for all the new countries. So the English seats went down from about 80 to 72, something like that. So there were 8 fewer seats to fight for. So there were going to be 8 losers, whatever happened. But we managed to go from 12 to 13. So we got bigger in a smaller field, if you see what I'm saying, which was very impressive. And everyone said, oh, that was a fluke. It shouldn't have happened. But we were here to stay now. And I suddenly found myself at the age of 59 elected as an MEP with really no political experience at all. And it was an enormous learning curve. But I was able to get some good staff, and that makes a very big difference. But I'm talking more about me personally now, you may want me to talk about what more general terms.
No, it's good to interesting to hear your personal
Yeah,
story as
yes.
well.
I felt as an MEP, I had two masters. I had UKIP was one master. UKIP got me into the position I had. On the other hand, I had the public were a master because they expected me to do a job for them, a representative job, and I had to satisfy the expectations of the public, the constituents, and I had to satisfy the expectations of my party in putting some money into the party, into raising the being high profile in campaigns. And I realized that from a very early stage. And I feel that throughout the 10 years I was there, I feel I got it about right for somebody who isn't a natural politician. I did the best with what I had, is how I would say it. But it was a fantastic experience being part of a political party that was growing at the speed that it was. And we started to contest Westminster by-elections. Do you know what I mean by by-election?
No.
Oh, this is an election between elections where a sitting member of parliament either dies or retires or resigns or is sacked. And so they have to replace him in the middle of a parliament. And that's called a by-election. Now, by-elections always offer an opportunity for smaller parties because at a by-election, you're not voting in a government. You're just voting in one MP. And unless the situation in the parliament is so tight that one MP will make a big difference, at by-elections, the voters will often experiment with the smaller parties. And the Liberal Democrats like that, the Greens like that. So at by-elections in this country, you find that every party and all sorts of independent individuals, they all pile in. It's all great fun to have by-elections. And we found in UKIP, we were starting to get quite respectable results in these by-elections. There was something else happening as well. In the early days of UKIP, everybody said that people who vote UKIP used to vote Conservative. All the UKIP votes were coming from Conservatives. But we were starting to demonstrate that was wrong. In the West Midlands and in the north of England, a lot of the votes we were getting were coming from former Labour voters because they were worried about the immigration. And we were seeing a split in the Labour Party in that you had the senior people in the Labour Party, mainly based in London. They were saying what a good thing immigration was and how racist it was to say that you didn't like a lot of immigration. But of course, having all this immigration from the EU, remember, we got about 3 million people in from Eastern Europe in a very short time. And some of them were good workers. Some of them were looking for benefits. Others were criminals. You know, they were all mixtures. And they were competing for jobs and for housing with the ordinary British working man. And that is what started to get us votes. And we contested several by-elections. We had pretty good candidates. We got a very good campaign team organized. It became pretty professional. We modeled ourselves on the Liberal Democrats in that way. We looked at what they were doing in by-election campaigns and we tried to follow and copy them because we could see that they would be successful often in by-elections. And we came second in a number of by-elections, which was a really good effort in this country to beat Labour and Liberal Democrats into third and fourth place, or to beat Conservatives and Liberal Democrats into third and fourth place. We would be second. And in one of them, it looked as though we were almost on the verge of winning it. So it was really very, very exciting. But I'm conscious that you want to talk more about Brexit itself, don't you, rather than just my experiences as an MEP in UKIP.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Brexit. You said you would have supported membership in the EU in the
1975. I was politically pretty ignorant in 1975. All I'd seen of the EU, which was then called the EEC, the European Economic Community, it wasn't a political setup. as a farmer, they had a better price structure, a better support system for agriculture than we had in this country, and it looked good. There didn't seem to be many downsides to it, but that was in those days, because it was just a trading arrangement. There was no political involvement. Sorry, you were about to say something.
No, I mean, it was a trading arrangement, plus farmers got free money.
Yes, the initial system was guaranteed prices or intervention prices, and they were better than the system we'd had before. So there was definitely a move up in that respect. And so farmers tended to give it the thumbs up. But there was no political interference. I have to stress that. But this was just the Treaty of Rome. We hadn't had the Single European Act. We hadn't had the Maastricht Treaty. And when these things came in, it started to look very, very different. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher signed this European Single Act, and suddenly the EU had control over our environmental policy. I mean, that was a massive change. And we were told we had to build wind turbines and things. The fishing as well, there were big problems with the fishing industry. And slowly, elements of the country started to realize that we weren't in control of things. It was coming from Brussels, rules from Brussels. I mean, rules on how bent a banana should be, stupid things like that. And then we found that our government couldn't lower fuel duty. They could only move it the way the EU wanted them to move it. And slowly the realization started to dawn on people that our politicians were unable to completely do our bidding. We were being governed in many respects by people in Brussels whose names we didn't know and whose rules we didn't seem to be able to change. And it started to worry a lot of us. And I started to see beyond farming that this was not the way for a country to be run. We should be able to elect and dismiss those who govern us. And once you get away from that, you get into the world of a bureaucracy with people who have jobs for life, governing for life. And there's something wrong with that. And that started to motivate me more than the better prices for the farming. And I just had to trust that when we left the EU, we would continue to support agriculture. And we have done that. And if you look at what's happening to agriculture in Europe at the moment, as I speak, last year we've seen major, revolts by farmers in the Netherlands, forming their own political party. We've seen, as usual, in France, but that's nothing new. But Germany, that was a surprise. To see the German farmers rise up like that, they were obviously very, very upset. And when you look at what they're being told to do, they're being made responsible for improving the world's weather. And they're told that the only way we can improve the world's weather is for European farmers to farm fewer acres, fewer animals, to halve their pesticide use, and to farm 25% of their land organically. And it's absolutely crazy. It will reduce the amount of food that's produced in Europe. That will be substituted by imports from other parts of the world where they obey none of these rules. And so the world's weather won't improve and European farmers will be impoverished. And so British farmers are watching what's going on in Europe at the moment and are thinking, well, Brexit hasn't been that bad after all. We've got our problems here. I quite acknowledge that. But we haven't been motivated to take to the streets with our tractors the way they have in Germany, France, and the Netherlands. And I think that's quite important. I really do. I feel that we're going to see a change in the European elections, which are coming up, aren't they, in a few months? There's going to be less Green MPs elected, in my opinion, and more people on the right of the Parliament. And I think that's what you're aiming for, I believe, Klaus. Is that right?
That's correct.
I think you stand a good chance, personally. As far as Sweden goes, I was very aware, it would have been getting on for 10 years ago, when Angela Merkel, who was the Chancellor of Germany, said, we're going to welcome refugees from Syria and North Africa. And they just came in huge numbers. And I understand a lot of them went to Sweden. I understand that large numbers arrived very suddenly, and it's created social problems in Sweden. Am I right? I think I'm right.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And there's really not a great deal you can do about it while you're in the European Union. I know Sweden is not in Schengen, but you still have open borders, don't you?
Yeah, we are in Schengen.
You are in Schengen, right?
Yeah.
So you have lost control completely of your immigration policy. Your politicians can do nothing, and you're purely at the whim now of the European Commission as to who migrates to Sweden and who doesn't, which is pretty worrying, I think, because, as I said before, some of the immigrants you're getting will be good hard workers and will be going there to earn honest money. But some will be going, as they came to this country, to exploit our very generous benefit system. But some will be going to Sweden for opportunities to commit crimes. And that's not so good, is it? And you can't stop it.
Yeah, especially with the new immigration or migration pact that's being signed.
Yeah. Then, where you have to share the load, I think. Isn't that the expression?
Yeah.
Everyone has to take a proportion.
Yeah.
So poor old
pay.
Yeah.
You can pay if you don't want to take your share also.
Oh, you can buy yourself out of it, can you?
Yes.
I see. Yeah. It's right. Has Sweden taken that option?
Well, it's still not signed yet, and the details of it aren't entirely clear, but it will be completed, I think, within the next few months. Although we don't really know what's in it, but
no. And the numbers are quite alarming, aren't they? Coming from North Africa to Lampedusa, the Italian island in the Mediterranean Sea, and there's huge numbers coming there, and it's got to stop. Everyone's making a fool of Europe.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, we've got the problem in this country now, where we have tens of thousands of so-called asylum seekers who've arrived here illegally on boats, and they are now they're mainly Muslim, the Islam religion. They're now convincing certain Church of England priests that actually they're going to convert to Christianity, and so they're converted and baptized. Immediately, that makes them what's known as apostates. So if they went back to a Muslim country, having converted from Islam to Christianity, they could be executed. So they then appeal to the asylum board, or whatever you want to call it, and they say, well, we would be killed, executed if we went back home. We want asylum, and they'll get it. It's so cynical, and I'm just, my breath was taken away really when I heard about it. It's just a back door into Britain, and it's very, very worrying.
Yeah. Because, that tactic has been used here already for years.
Yes. So we were in this, just going back to the 1990s and the early 2000s, there was this talk of a European army, and that worried us. There's this European police force. That sounded very sinister, because people from the European police force could come into this country, arrest me and take me away, and I'd have very few rights. We didn't like that at all. Then there was the whole business of the euro, which Sweden has not yet joined. Is that right?
No.
You've kept your currency, but it's something that it's a temporary privilege you have, I understand. That
it's something like that. And but there's a strong push by the elites in Sweden to join the euro.
Oh, yeah. Yes, of course, because it's all subject. The whole philosophy of the European Union is something called ever closer union, and that means one set of laws and one currency and one language, it's all moving to be one country, and you cannot have one country with two different currencies. So there'll come a time when Denmark and Sweden will be told, look, you know, when the European Union is moving on, if you want to remain in it, you're going to have to join the euro. You might think that sounds sort of fantastic and far-fetched, but I feel it's inevitable under the what's the word? The logo of ever closer union. You can't stay out of it forever.
Not far-fetched at all. Everything is becoming Euroized, or what I should call it. Yeah.
And there was and joining the euro, there was another huge worry, and this was the unfunded pension liabilities in many European countries. That if we joined the euro, we would then have to take a fair share of that. And our own problem is bad enough, but in some of these European countries, the unfunded state pension liabilities are just colossal. And we understood if we joined the euro, that we would have to take our share of that. It would all be spread evenly across all the member states. And so there was a huge fight about the euro. I remember I was a member of the National Farmers Union on the governing council in the UK. And we had a debate about whether Britain should join the euro from the point of view of agriculture. And I led the debate on saying, no, we shouldn't join the euro. I expected to be beaten, and I was, but I got, it was 56-11, which I was quite pleased about. I didn't think that I'd get 11 votes, but anyway, we did. But that was just farmers wanting the security of the euro. But I remember a few years later, 2 or 3 of them saying to me, thank God we didn't join the euro. And these were people who've been campaigning for Britain to join the euro. And that was a big topic in Britain 20 years ago, to join the euro or not to join the euro. And those who were saying we should be doing it took this rather patronizing view of, oh, well, we know better than you do. We are the enlightened. We know this is the future. Sticking with the pound is like sticking with horses when cars are available, that sort of thing. But the country as a whole didn't want it. And I have to thank Gordon Brown, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer under Tony Blair for several years. He introduced 5 tests that would have to be passed for this country to join the euro. And he concluded, well, we hadn't passed the 5 tests. Much of the irritation of Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister, the two didn't really get on very well. And I feel that Gordon Brown actually saved us from the euro. To give credit where it's due, I think he made a big difference to that.
So I'm running for this European Parliament, but only with one idea, and that is for a Swexit, for Sweden to leave the EU eventually.
Yeah,
it's a long path, but you have to start somewhere. Everything starts with the first step.
Yeah.
And
what is your background?
My background is completely unpolitical. I have not been a member of any political party. I have not been interested in politics. Well, I shouldn't say interested. I have not been. It hasn't appealed to me, party politics at all. I've been in the private sector my whole life. But there has come a point when something needs to be done. So I'm trying to do something.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm looking and wanting to go to Brussels, but I'm willing to make some sacrifice if this can help my country. So that is my background. Not.
Yes, but you said in the private sector, is that manufacturing, or maybe you were a solicitor or teaching?
No, it's been more consulting in IT, in finance, economics.
Right. I understand. So you're obviously an intelligent individual with a very good grasp of IT and a strong candidate.
I figured out a few things, how they work. So
yeah. But if one looks at the situation that Sweden is in, I mean, Sweden is a law-abiding country. It's a relatively small population, about 11 million people. Would that be right?
Yeah, we used to be 8 million until a few decades ago, and then
Yes,
things started to change.
It's 11 million people, which is, it's not a big country, but it's big enough to stand on its own 2 feet easily with 11 million people.
Yeah.
We now have a decision in the Western world to make. Do we invest literally trillions of pounds or dollars in trying to improve the world's weather, while we have China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea who aren't remotely interested in wasting money trying to do that, and will use that money instead in making weapons with which to attack us? I feel that we are making ourselves very, very vulnerable in this quest to improve the world's weather. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Military power requires production. It requires a sound economy, and you should be very careful where you spend your money, especially in times like these.
So honestly, I think I was born in 1949 in this country, and I think I'm very lucky to be born where I was and when I was, and people like me. We've gone through our lives really seeing full employment, no wars, attacks on our country. We've been very, very lucky. But I think that my children, my sons, who are now in their early 30s, it's much more difficult for them to get a house to live in. And when we look at America, who's supposed to be taking the lead, we have a geriatric president of America who really should retire immediately. He's not up to it. Or we've got Donald Trump, who's bogged down with all these different legal cases against him. I'm really worried, Klaus. I have to say, I'm really worried.
What would you recommend for a Swedish exit movement out of the EU? What have you learned?
Well, what we used to say in our manifestos, we used to look for policies that the other parties couldn't have because the European Union wouldn't allow them. So we could slash fuel duty. We could put that in our manifesto, knowing full well that the other parties couldn't do that because they would need the EU's permission. And so that was a principle that we used, looking for policies that would be popular and that the other parties couldn't pinch from us, couldn't steal from us, because they couldn't enact them themselves. These were decisions would be made in Brussels, and our parliament couldn't do it. And I think that's a very strong argument if you're trying to produce a manifesto at an election. But I appreciate it's a bit different from you standing as an independent candidate at European Parliament election. You can point out the things that Sweden could be doing and should be doing, but isn't able to do because of EU legislation. And this is agriculture and environment. Sweden has now been made famous by a young woman called Greta Thunberg, who we hear quite a lot of here. And I don't know whether it's political suicide to oppose her. I mean, she's taken on the mantle of a goddess almost, hasn't she? That she can't be contradicted. And yet, in my opinion, she talks utter nonsense. But that's a decision you'll have to make. But Sweden, like every other country in the Western world, is starting to commit itself to huge expenditure in trying to improve the world's weather. I am very, very skeptical that small changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide are really going to make much difference. If we want to improve the world's weather, we are going to have to control solar cycles and solar activity. We're going to have to control lunar cycles. We're going to have to control jet streams. We're going to have to control ocean currents. We're going to have to control water vapor that has a dramatic effect on our weather. If we can't control those 5 things, we can't improve the world's weather. That's just my opinion. And spending literally trillions of euros and kronas and dollars and pounds into trying to do what I think is impossible is a very stupid way to spend money. It's a very dangerous way to spend money because it leaves, as I've said before, it leaves us wide open to the territorial ambitions of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So I mustn't say that again. I've said it too often already. Sorry, I'll shut up on that from now on.
Yeah. So how did you make your movement popular?
By pointing out,
because we have a huge problem with there's so much money spent from the EU on propaganda for the EU.
Yes,
in schools, in media. They finance a little road here and there and put up a sign financed by the EU. So people today, they think, well, we could never survive without the EU at this point.
I think what you have to say, Klaus, is that Sweden will be making every year a financial contribution to the European Union. And I'm pretty certain that Sweden is a net contributor. In other words, you are putting more in than you're getting back. So when people say, oh, we've had this bridge or something gift from the European Union and it cost 2 million krona or whatever it was, you can say, well, in order to get that 2 million krona, we had to give the EU 3 million krona. Is it krona or crowns you have?
Yeah, they're called kronor in Swedish, but it means crowns in English.
Yeah, okay. So we use that argument a lot. Every time anyone said, oh, aren't we lucky we're getting such and such from the EU, we would say, well, in our case, it was twice as much. For every pound that we got from the EU, our taxpayers would have to send them £2. So it was a pretty bad deal.
For us, it's about 1 to 3 at this point.
As much as that?
Yeah.
Oh, but you must use that. Because
but then the EU comes around and says, well, you can't just look at the fee. You get access to the common market. That is worth much, much more than what you pay.
Well, after Brexit, we are still trading with Europe. Yes, it's a little more difficult. The one example I can give you is the lamb trade. Lamb, a sheep meat. This country produces a huge surplus because of all the grass we have. And when we were in the EU, it was very easy to export our surplus into very willing customers in France and in Italy in particular. I was worried that lamb was going to be a difficulty after Brexit, that they would make it difficult for us to export it there. But that didn't happen. It didn't happen. There's been what's called a strong pull factor. The customers within France and Italy really want our lamb, our sheep meat, and they have gone to great lengths to help us get it there. So we have our push factor, our marketing efforts from this country to get the lamb there, but there is the pull factor. The consumers and the customers in France and in Italy and Spain really want it. And so the trade hasn't suffered. And the lamb trade has been very good ever since we left. We had the Brexit, but we had this transitional phase. And it wasn't until about the end of 2020, I think, that we actually became completely independent. And everyone thought the lamb price would collapse in this country. It didn't. It went up. And that proved that leaving the EU wasn't the disaster that everyone said it was going to be from the point of view of trade. Because if a product like lamb, which is, it has to be frozen, it's not the easiest thing to transport in the meat form, I mean. If we could succeed with that, and if it didn't upset the industry here, if that worked, well, lots of other things could work. And actually, it's been almost more difficult importing certain things. There's more red tape. but people are finding their way around it. And after all, it's companies and people who trade with one another, not really countries. And where you have a willing buyer and a willing seller, a willing supplier, a willing customer, they will find the way through the red tape. I've been very, very impressed by that. And so we haven't suffered the way all the experts said we were going to. I mean, if you'd been in this country in 2016, when we had the big Brexit campaign, we were being told that whole industries would disappear. We would have a much, much lower standard of living. Leaving the EU would be an absolute disaster. They called it Project Fear. They frightened people with saying their living standards were going to collapse. There would be lots of things they wouldn't be able to get. And it wasn't true. And so we've been through it. We've done it. And so as somebody who's pushing for Swexit, you can say, well, look at the United Kingdom.
What happened to tariffs and customs, things like that? That you hadn't had before?
No, we aren't charging any tariffs on imports of anything from the EU, and we're making it relatively easy. They haven't put tariffs on, as far as I know, or if they have, they're very low, because our product is very competitive in Europe, our sheep meat. And somebody listening to this might say Stuart Agnew's talking nonsense, but if there is a tariff, it's not enough to deter the trade. That's how I would put it. I don't think there is one. It's red tape that's the problem rather than a tariff. Red tape on health and safety, that sort of thing. Unnecessary, a lot of it. But they're finding a way through it. The private sector has worked really well. I take my hat off to them in being able to fill in all this paperwork and do the job to the satisfaction of the European officials.
So that's one of the main arguments that people have against leaving the union, that, it would be so difficult to export to Europe, and we'd have to pay such high tariffs we couldn't export competitively. Well, but you haven't seen that. You haven't seen that in your case, anyway.
No, we haven't. We haven't. Yeah. It's the red tape makes it difficult, and you need to be a fairly large firm to have the staff and the resources to find your way around the red tape. But it's been going on now for 4 years, and you're not hearing people saying we've lost our European market. I hope I'm not being naive in saying this, but I'm not reading that anywhere. That where we've lost huge chunks of our market because of Brexit, where we were exporting to the EU. If our product was good enough, we're continuing to do it. But of course, our trade there, even when we were members, was diminishing as a proportion of our overall trade. We were exporting to other countries, not just the EU. That wasn't a huge market for us. We had other places to go to. And indeed, since we've had Brexit, we've signed many free trade agreements with third countries.
Which you weren't allowed to do, probably before.
Quite. Oh, yes.
While you were in.
Our trade policy prior to Brexit had to be organised and decided by the European Union. They decided on all the external tariffs. They made it difficult. They wanted what they wanted in Europe was high standards of health and safety, animal welfare, wages, treatment of women, all that sort of thing. They wanted high standards within businesses and commerce within the European Union. And the idea was you had those and you protected those businesses, which could have been uncompetitive because of all the steps they had to take to satisfy those criteria. They protected them with this customs ring, this ring of steel around the European Union with a high tariff barrier, and only the European Union, could decide what that tariff barrier was. And it was protectionist. And what it does is it stultifies endeavour and enterprise, I felt, within the European Union. The objectives, these corporate objectives, were always about starting more and more to be woke. Do you know what I mean by this word woke? Social and economic governments or environmental governments, they're boasting about all that. I would say that the vast majority of customers and consumers in Europe couldn't care less about that. They want to have a reliable product regularly at a price they can afford. That's what they want. And companies signing up to all these woke agendas is of little interest to the majority of consumers. Again, I may have said something that other people will get very exercised about, but I do believe that.
Yeah. So the second most common argument against leaving the union is, well, look at Great Britain. Look at what happened to them. Look at all the troubles they're in now.
Well,
do you recognize this argument?
No, because you look at France and Germany, their economies are in a poorer state than Britain's, definitely. And Germany is stalling. And one of the reasons it's stalling is electrification of its cars. They've been given an impossible task. They've been told they must electrify all the cars they sell by a certain date. And they've got to try and do it when there's Chinese electric vehicles coming in at half the price. The Chinese have the battery market. So the European the German car industry is being strangled. That is Germany's biggest industry, or one of them. It's making life very difficult. They've got an energy crisis now. Things are not good for France and Germany. Britain is doing better than France and Germany. That much I can promise you. Look at unemployment figures. We haven't got mass unemployment. Look at gross production. I know we're technically in a tiny recession now, but we are doing better than France and Germany. We are doing better than they are. And they're the two biggest economies in Europe. And if we can leave the European Union and outperform them, we can't be doing badly. France, they have got huge problems in France. They want to keep the state pension age at 62, I think, which is not affordable. I mean, ours has gone up to 66. And that's going to be difficult for us to afford. But in France, they just seem to have shut their eyes and be in a state of denial that they can have a pension at the age of 62, when really their country can't afford it. So France has got problems too with immigration. It's not doing well, and employment there, it's not going well in France and Germany. We have not suffered with our Brexit, because there are two big problems that are coming in between. Hardly was Brexit done and dusted when we had COVID, and then we had the energy crisis triggered by the invasion of Ukraine. And so these two events have come in and really masked what was happening with Brexit. It's made it very, very difficult to see, well, where are the biggest influences? Is Brexit the biggest one, or is COVID? That's fading away now. But COVID, everything shut down for about a year, made life very, very difficult. And we borrowed enormous sums of money to try and keep people going. And as soon as that crisis was out of the way, we have this energy crisis where all the gas bills doubled and electricity prices went up. Cost of living crisis, we called it. But it's just as bad in Germany and France as it is here, because the same factors applied. And they had no solutions better than ours of how to deal with it. And indeed, in Germany, it's a real difficulty for them now, isn't it? Because they closed nuclear power stations. They've closed coal-fired power stations. They were relying on this Russian gas, which they say is less likely to spoil the world's weather. And suddenly they can't have that for political reasons. Where do they go? So they're importing liquefied natural gas from the United States. So you've got to buy that. That's all got to be liquefied at high cost. Then it's got to be regasified and transported. It's big cost for Germany. Germany is not happy. And I think you're seeing that with the way the farmers demonstrated. There was a bit of a tip of the iceberg. So you can easily say that Britain has thrived relative to France and Germany. Britain has thrived after Brexit. We're not in trouble.
Any concluding advice for Swexit movement.
Stick at it. Keep talking about the money. Three crowns in to get one back. I mean, that's pretty compelling. No, those 2 crowns could have been spent on other things in Sweden, which the Swedish population would have liked. That's important. This whole net zero thing, make your own decisions on that. Don't have the EU do it for you. That's another big thing. And retain your currency forever.
Yes. Well, thank you, Stuart. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for all the work you put in trying to get the technical side set up. I'm not good at it, and you were very, very patient, but we have achieved something, and I wish you all the very best. I really do.
Well, next time I'm in Norfolk, I'll come by and set up the computer for you.
You have my number. You're most welcome. Most welcome, and I'll give you a little tour of the place.
Thank you very much.
Radio, Klaus. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.